Q&A guide, responding to tough questions about God's judgment in the Old Testament. How could a loving God command the killing of innocent babies in Canaan? That is one of the hardest questions in the Bible, and we shouldn't minimize how disturbing it feels. From our perspective, infants are innocent, but in Canaan, God was executing corporate judgment on a culture that practiced child sacrifice, idolatry, and extreme evil. After giving them over 400 years to repent, Genesis 15:16, he was removing a terminal spiritual disease. We also trust that God, in his sovereignty, may have shown mercy to those infants by receiving them into his care, sparing them from growing up in such depravity. Ultimately, we look to Jesus to understand God's heart. He blessed children, died for sinners, and now calls us to love and protect the vulnerable, not to carry out judgment ourselves. If God told you to kill a baby, would you do it? Today, God does not give that command. He has spoken finally through Jesus, who said, "Let the little children come to me and love your enemies." Any voice telling someone to harm a child today contradicts the character of Christ. But if I were an Israelite in Canaan, hearing that command directly from God through Moses, I would be faced with a choice: obey God, trusting his perfect justice, or disobey and reject his authority. In that unique moment in redemptive history, obedience was the right response, as hard as that is for us to grasp now. Why didn't God just strike the Canaanites supernaturally like he did with Sodom? In Sodom, there was no covenant nation present to act as God's instrument, only Lot, who was rescued from judgment. In Canaan, God was training Israel in covenant obedience, holiness, and the cost of separating from evil. By involving them, he taught them to take his holiness seriously. Different moments in salvation history called for different methods, but in both, God was just, and he spared those who turned to him. Doesn't this make God a moral monster? It can feel that way if we only look at one page of the story. But the Bible reveals a God who is slow to anger, patient for centuries, Genesis 15:16, merciful to those who repent, Rahab Nineveh, and who ultimately takes judgment on himself at the cross. What happened in Canaan was a severe, unique act of justice against profound and persistent evil, not a reflection of God's daily disposition. In Jesus, we see God's heart fully. He bears our punishment and offers mercy to all who believe. How can you worship a God who would do that? I worship him because he is holy as well as loving, and because he gave his own son to save people like me, who deserve judgment. I don't understand everything he does, but I trust his character because of Jesus. The cross is where God's justice and mercy met. He didn't overlook sin. He paid for it himself. That gives me the confidence to trust him even when I don't fully understand his ways in the Old Testament. What about the innocent children? Did they go to hell? The Bible doesn't explicitly say, but it gives us clues about God's heart for the innocent. David believed he would see his deceased infant again, 2 Samuel 12:23. Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these," Matthew 19:14. God is perfectly just and merciful. We can trust him with their eternal fate. Many Christians believe God receives those who die before the age of accountability into his grace. Key principles to remember: 1. Context matters. Canaan was a unique, one-time act of corporate judgment in redemptive history. 2. God is patient. He waited over 400 years before acting. 3. God spares the repentant. Rahab and her household were saved. 4. Jesus is the final word. He reveals God's heart perfectly. 5. We are under a new covenant, called to love, not to holy war. The final thought to share: these passages are difficult, and it's okay to sit in that tension. I don't have all the answers, but I trust the God who does. And I've found that the more I look at Jesus, the more I can say, Even when I don't understand your ways, I trust your heart.